Hello, and welcome to Tales for Life. In each episode of this podcast, we'll explore a folk or fairy tale from a different culture or region and discover the life lessons, values, and morals they offer that we can use today. Join me on the journey through the magical and meaningful world of folk and fairy tales. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tales for Life podcast. Today's episode might well go down as the longest title I'll ever use, but hey, sometimes a few words just don't cut it. Today's episode is titled, Look Like What You Want, or You'll Be Stuck with What You Have. Most of us have probably heard the phrase, dress for success. If not, now you have. It doesn't take a whole lot of brain cells to put a meaning to those three simple words. If you want to succeed, you can't look like something the cat dragged in. But let's face it, there's a huge gap between looking better than dead and looking good. There's a reason the phrase dress for success exists, and there's a reason it still rings true. It's not a question of fair or unfair, right or wrong, or anything else. It exists because appearances matter. And the reason they matter is because your appearance, my appearance, anyone else's appearance reflects on whoever they're around or associated with. You can rise up or fall down based not just on your appearance, but on the appearance of whoever you get associated with. This isn't a new circumstance. Royals and aristocracy have done their best to separate themselves from the common folk for centuries. The common folk were, naturally, aware of this and created tales around it. Mark Twain's The Prince and the Pauper delves into this, and there are many other folk tales older than that we can also look to. One such tale comes from Spain and is titled simply, The Flea. Once there was and was not a king of Spain. He loved to laugh. He loved a good joke as well as any fellow. Best of all, he loved a riddle. One day he was being dressed by his chamberlain. As the royal doublet was being slipped over the royal head, a flea jumped from the safe hiding place of the stiff lace ruff. It landed directly upon the king. Quicker than half a wink, the king clapped his hand over the flea and began to laugh. Por Dios, a flea! Who ever heard of a king of Spain having a flea? It is monstrous. It is delicious. We must not treat her lightly, this flea. You understand, my Lord Chamberlain, that having jumped on the royal person, she has now become a royal flea. Consider what we shall do with her. But the chamberlain was a man of little wit. He could clothe the king's body, but he could not add one ribbon or one button to the king's imagination. I have it, said the king at last, exploding again into laughter. We will pasture out this flea in a great cage, large enough for a goat, an ox, an elephant. She shall be fed enormously. When she is of a proper size, I will have her killed and her skin made into a tambourine. The Infanta, my daughter, shall dance to it. We will make a fine riddle out of it. Whichever of her suitors can answer the riddle shall marry her. There is a royal joke worthy of a king. Eh, my Lord Chamberlain? And we will call the flea Philippa. In his secret heart, the chamberlain thought the king quite mad. But all he answered was, Very good, your majesty, and went out to see that proper pasturage was provided for Philippa. At the end of a fortnight, the flea was as large as a rat. At the end of a month, she was as large as a cat who might have eaten that rat. At the end of a second month, she was the size of a dog who might have chased that cat. At the end of 3 months, she was the size of a calf. The king ordered Philippa killed. Her skin was stretched, dried, beaten, until it was as soft, as fine as silk. Then it was made into a tambourine with brass clappers and ribbons, the finest tambourine in all of Spain. The Infanta, whose name was Isabel, but who was called Belita for convenience, learned to dance with Felipa very prettily, and the king himself composed a rhyme to go with the riddle. Whenever a suitor came courting, the Infanta would dance. When she had finished, the king would recite, Belita, Felipa, they dance well together. Belita, Felipa, now answer me whether you know this Felipa, this animalita. You answer right, then you marry Belita. Princes and dukes came from Spain and Portugal, France and Italy. They were not dull-witted like the chamberlain, and they saw through the joke. The king was riddling about the tambourine. It was made from parchment, and they thought they knew perfectly well where parchment came from. So a prince would answer, a goat, your majesty, and a duke would answer, a sheep, your majesty, each sure he was right. And the Infanta would run away laughing, and the king would roar with delight and shout, wrong again! But after a while the king got tired of this sheep and goat business. He wanted the riddle guessed. He wanted the Infanta married. So he sent forth a command that the next suitor who failed to guess the riddle should be hanged, and short work made of it too. That put a stop to the princes and dukes. But far up in the Castilian highlands, a shepherd heard about the riddle. He was young, but not very clever. He thought, it would be a fine thing for a shepherd to marry an Infanta. So he said to his younger brother, Manuelito, you shall mind the sheep and goats. I will go to the king's palace. But his mother said, Son, you are a fool. How should you guess a riddle when you cannot read or write, and those who can have failed? Stay at home and save yourself a hanging. Having once made up his mind, nothing would stop him, not even fear. So his mother baked him a tortilla to carry with him, gave him her blessing, and let him go. The shepherd hadn't gone far when he was stopped by a little black ant. Señor Pastor, she cried, give me a ride to the king's court in your pouch. Señorita Ant, you cannot ride in my pouch. There is a tortilla there which I shall have for my breakfast. Your feet are dirty from walking, and you will trample all over it. See, I will dust off my feet on the grass here, and promise not to step once on the tortilla. So the shepherd put the ant into his shepherd's pouch and tramped on. Soon he encountered a black beetle who said, Señor Pastor, give me a ride to the king's court in your pouch. Señor Beetle, you cannot ride in my pouch. There is a tortilla there which I shall presently have for my breakfast, and who wants a black beetle tramping all over his breakfast? I will fasten my claws into the side of your pouch and not go near the tortilla. So the shepherd took up the beetle and carried him along. He hadn't gone far when he came upon a little gray mouse who cried, Señor Pastor, give me a ride to the king's court in your pouch. But the shepherd shook his head. Señor Mouse, you are too clumsy, and I don't like the flavor of your breath. It will spoil my tortilla that I intend to have for my breakfast. Why not eat the tortilla now, and then the breakfast will be over and done with? The mouse said this so gently, so coaxingly, that the shepherd thought it was a splendid idea. He sat down and ate the tortilla. He gave a little crumb to Señorita Ant, a crumb to Señor Beetle, and a big crumb to Señor Mouse. Then he went on his road to the king's court. When he reached the king's palace, he was frightened. He sat himself down under a dark tree to wait for his courage to grow. What are you waiting for? Called the ant, the beetle, and the mouse all together. I go to answer a riddle. If I fail, I shall be hanged. That isn't so pleasant. So I am waiting here where I can enjoy being alive for a little moment longer. What is the riddle? I have heard that it has to do with something called Felipa that dances, whoever she may be. Go on, and we will help you. Hurry, hurry, it is hot in your pouch. So the shepherd climbed the palace steps and told the guard he had come to answer the riddle. The guard passed him on to the footman, saying, Pobrecito, poor little wretch. The footman passed him on to the lackey, saying, Pobrecito. The lackey passed him on to the court chamberlain, saying, Pobrecito. and it was the chamberlain's business to present him to the king. The king shook his head when he saw the shepherd's staff in the young man's hand and the shepherd's pouch hanging from his belt. He said, "A shepherd's life is better than no life at all. Better go back to your flocks." But the shepherd was as rich in stubbornness as he was poor in learning. He insisted he must answer the riddle. So the Infanta came and danced with the tambourine, and the king laughed and said his rhyme. Belita, Felipa, they dance well together. Belipa, Felipa, now answer me whether you know this Felipa, this Animalita. If you answer right, then you marry Belita. The shepherd strode over and took the tambourine from the hand of the Infanta. He felt the skin carefully. To himself he said, "I know sheep and I know goats, and this isn't either." "Can't you guess?" whispered the black beetle from his pouch. "No," said the shepherd. "Let me out," said the little ant. "Perhaps I can tell you what it is." So the shepherd unfastened the pouch, and Señorita Ant crawled out, unseen by the court. She crawled all over the tambourine and came back whispering, "You can't fool me. I'd know a flea anywhere, any size." "Don't take all day," shouted the king. "Who is Felipa?" "She's a flea," said the shepherd. Then the court was in a flutter. "I don't want to marry a shepherd," said the Infanta. "You shan't," said the king. "I'm the one to say shan't," said the shepherd. "I will grant you any favor," said the Infanta. "I will grant you another," said the king. "It was a long journey here walking," said the shepherd. "I'd like a cart to ride home in." "And 2 oxen to draw it," whispered the black beetle. "And 2 oxen to draw it," repeated the shepherd. "You shall have them," said the king. "And what shall I give you?" asked the Infanta. "Tell her you want your pouch filled with gold," whispered Señor Mouse. "That's little enough," said the Infanta. But while the royal groom was fetching the cart and oxen, and the lord of the treasury was fetching a bag of gold, Señor Mouse was gnawing a hole in the pouch. When they came to pour in the gold, it fell through as fast as water, so that all around the feet of the shepherd it rose like a shining yellow stream. "That's a great amount of gold," said the king at last. "It's enough," said the shepherd. He took his cart, filled it with the gold, and drove back to the highlands of Castile. He married a shepherd's daughter, who never had to do anything but sit in a rocking chair and fan herself all day. And that's a contented life, you might say, for anyone who likes it. Like many tales that deal with the peasant versus royalty conflict, this one ends happily in favor of the peasant. But there are 3 points along our theme of dressing for success that we should note and be mindful of. First, of course, is the king. He sets the tone from the beginning of the tale, and it's obvious that he is very conscious of status and appearances. He wants his daughter, the princess, to marry someone not just of good rank, but who is also clever. He has therefore devised a very public test for would-be suitors. In short, the king has made it clear that appearances matter to him, and that, whether they like it or not, appearances will matter to the suitors. There's no getting away from it. Second, we have the Infanta, or princess. She shows us that when one influential person cares about appearances, those people around that person will also care. Like the proverbial stone into a lake, the ripple effect doesn't stop where the stone hits the water. Now you might think that the third point is the shepherd himself, who defies his own obvious appearance to risk his life for the sake of marrying the princess. But that's not the case, because throughout the story we're reminded that he knows he doesn't fit the appearance. In fact, he fully expects himself to fail and be hanged. That is, he knows he won't measure up, ever. The third point then is the shepherd's helpers, the ant, beetle, and mouse. These 3 animals, who also are lacking in the appearance category, are the only ones who see beyond appearances to the person underneath. What does that mean for us? Again, whether we like it or not, this tale confirms that you are not going to get a fair shake by those who look up to you or those who look down on you. Only the ones looking at you from the same level are going to care about who you are rather than how you look, figuratively and literally. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. Dressing for success does work. You can pass the eye test, as it were, and have new places and people open up to you. In a fun bonus tale featuring Turkey's favorite folktale teacher, we find this to be true. One day, Nasruddin Hoja went to a bridal festival. The master of the feast, observing his old and wretched garments, paid him no consideration whatever. The Hoja saw that he had no chance of notice, so going out, he hurried to his house and putting on a splendid pelisse, returned to the place of the festival. No sooner did he enter the door than the master advanced to meet him and saying, "Welcome, Nasruddin Hoja," with all imaginable honor and reverence placed him at the head of the table and said, "Please to eat, Lord Hoja." Forthwith, the Hoja, taking hold of one of the furs of his pelisse, said, "Welcome, my pelisse. Please to eat, my lord." The master, looking at the Hoja with great surprise, said, "What are you about?" Whereupon the Hoja replied, "It is quite evident that all the honor paid is paid to my pelisse, so let it have some food too." When life hands us lemons, we make lemonade. When life hands us a fancy suit, we put it on and get invited to the ball. So if you want to go to the ball, dress for it. All of the rest of us doing the same, we'll see you there.